When we came together to decide which issue our group would be covering on a global scale, we decided on poverty. Poverty is an issue that has plagued many nations for centuries upon centuries, and it isn't going away anytime soon. Social classes divide up into the lower class, the middle class, and the upper class. Generally, poverty is associated with the lower class, but what we need to do is find a way to shift that lower class into a system where everyone can function without any financial assistance.
Poverty is all around the world. There are a lot of places where people are poor even though the country is rich. China has a lot of people affected by poverty. This is due to several things. The industries are exporting almost everything they produce, making the country elevate their incomes. They leave a small quantity of products in the country with elevated taxes, and because the salary stays the same, the population suffers from a really big inflation. They don't have enough money, thus, they stay poor. They leave a small quantity of the products in the country with elevated taxes. In Venezuela, the poverty is due to increases in prices with over 60% annual rate. Just a small percentage that works in the oil industry, which are the government allies, benefit from surpluses. This makes the low income of poor people able to buy fewer goods and essential services, making the poorness in Venezuela increase every year.
The lesson of poverty is a complex one because there's no easy way or standard definition of who is poor and who is not. Although we look at the living conditions of people to get an idea of their situation, typically it is when someone experiences a fundamental deprivation in well-being. The factors that cause poverty can be income inequality. Research allows us that when a country grows economically, overall, poverty reduces. If the national income is not equally distributed among all the communities in the country, there is a risk that poor communities will end up being poorer and individuals will feel it the most. The second factor can be conflicts and unrest. About 33% of the communities in absolute poverty live in places of conflict. In the past, countries like Rwanda and Sri Lanka suffered from poverty as a result of the years of tribal and civil wars. The third factor that I can come up with is the location and the adverse ecology and location. The location of countries as well as the communities within the country can make the people poor. Geographical and ecological factors such as mountains, swamps, and deserts, etc., have also made living conditions unbearable in many places. The fourth factor that contributes to poverty is natural disaster. Droughts, floods, hurricanes, and other unexpected natural events causes death, illness, and loss of income. In Ethiopia, for example, there were 15 droughts and famine between 1978 and 1998, and that led to the displacement, injury, and death of more than 1 million people in better connected communities. And the fifth factor that contributes to this is ill health and disability. Poverty can also get worse if communities are affected with diseases such as malaria and HIV/AIDS. Diseases cause many deaths, and children are left with no parents or caregivers. Household wealth can also drain quickly with disabled members. In many communities, disabled members are looked down upon and not allowed to inherit assets. The sixth factor that I came up with, inheritance of poverty. Families that have had a lifetime of poverty tend to pass on the situation to their children. They cannot afford education to their children, and the children grow with no skills. The children work on the same family farms and marry the families within similar conditions, and they turn into adults, then in turn pass on the tradition to their children. The seventh factor that I contribute is education, training, and skills. People who are educated or had some training or skill are in a better position to apply ideas and knowledge into living basic problems and enhancing their livelihoods. They're able to plan, follow instructions, and reach out to access information, tools, and support that can improve their livelihoods. In the absence of training, skills, and education, people cannot help themselves. They cannot prevent diseases and cannot apply new ways of doing things. The result is that the poverty situation is worse and are even more vulnerable than before. The last factor that I can come up with is gender discrimination. In many African countries, girls were not allowed to be in school. Families preferred to invest in boys' education than in girls. Women were also not allowed to do major economic activity and had less ownership on lands and assets. The idea negatively impacts on the well-being of women, and the development of their children is also impacted negatively. I would really like to add it to something. How the poverty is impacting people. The impact of poverty. Poverty brings about myriad of complications. The effect usually depend on the kind of poverty in question. Let us see things like hunger, health. First is hunger, health, and deaths. Absolute poverty results in extreme hunger, starvation, and malnutrition. People and children become vulnerable to preventable diseases such as cholera, dysentery, and tuberculosis with no access to health services and medications. Death rate rises. Relative poverty, on the other hand, forces people to engage in behavior that expose them to diseases such as HIV, AIDS, and etc. While they may not starve to death, they may be living on unhealthy foods which ultimately weaken their immunity to expose them to diseases. The second impact that I can come up with is a social and political impact. The relative poverty may cause people to indulge in social vices such as drugs, prostitution, and petty crimes as means to meet their immediate needs. In many developing countries, political leaders and rebel leaders take advantage and recruit young people, especially those in relative poverty, to fight for their interests in return for food and basic needs. These young folks feel vulnerable if they do not comply, as they have no other way of their situation. The third impact is economic. People in absolute poverty simply cannot afford food, water, shelter. They are not healthy enough to undertake economic activity. They cannot send young to school and the youth to community colleges and everything. So they cannot get any skills. The results are that there's an economic breakdown of the community which directly affect the larger region where they are vulnerable to poverty. Further to that, those in relative poverty who have a bit of training or education are forced to move out in search of better lives in the cities. This deprives the rural areas of the manpower to make their situation worse. As they migrate into the cities, they end up in slums, increase population, and put pressure on the amenities of the city.
The amount of poverty throughout the globe is slowly decreasing over decades according to ourworldanddata.org. However, just because there's less poverty in the world today doesn't necessarily mean we're in the clear. With nearly half of our country on welfare alone, we as a species need to take a step back and give a serious look at our world's financial affairs. Why should we care about poverty? Well, the reasons are limitless. Every nation is affected in some way by poverty. Take Germany, for example. In 1923, the Ruhr crisis occurred, in which there was massive inflation, causing Germany's citizens to be forced to carry around wheelbarrows of currency in order to just buy a loaf of bread. These were some tough times that Germany went through because they were unable to provide reparations brought about by the Treaty of Versailles post-World War I. Today, people across the globe are facing conditions that are just as rough and not nearly as globally recognized. We need to do something about these countries that are suffering and create a better quality of life for all. Unfortunately, it's very hard for people to care who aren't personally affected by this problem. And that's why we've added an element of gamification.
Rags to Riches, the journey above the poverty line. This is our RPG computer game. It's interactive and it's played online. Your character will have quests to achieve. The number of quests you have achieved will show on a progress bar. Once he has overcome the quest given per level, then that month we will donate 20% of our proceeds to organizations such as Stop Hunger Now. This is a virtual game realistic in animation, and it also has many challenges for the player to overcome as well. You can find this game at your local GameStop. It's a $30 initial game cost plus your first month free. Afterwards, it's $25 a month to continue play. Even if you cannot buy the game, please bring awareness to this world issue. Help us help stop world hunger and world poverty.
So the video game that we will be doing is a homeless man simulator. Now, similar to a lot of other simulation games where you would simulate, in some cases, a goat, a farmer, you're going to be a homeless person. And this homeless person needs money to live, like most people do in America or in the rest of the world. So you start off as this homeless man who's awoken by a doctor in a bargain bat in the alley, and he basically tells you that, hey, you need money to survive. And if you don't make any money, you will die. And he starts off with his first quest, going to a soup kitchen, in which he meets a man who gives him a job application. Now, with most homeless people, or many people in general, they get obstacles. And one of the first obstacles he gets is a homeless man brawl. That right there leads to him either making the decision to fight for his life for the sake of losing his job opportunity to go to jail, or being passively aggressive and deciding not to fight this homeless man and let him win. And the choice is yours after you gamify. But your main goal is to make $1,600 or more a week. And that's the process.
Our concept of rags to riches stems from the difficulty of survival for someone trying to claw their way up the social classes just to survive. A starting point for people with little experience or education would be fast food. The typical fast food worker makes around $9 an hour. If you were to work full-time on that wage, you would barely be able to survive just above the poverty line, living alone, let alone with a family. The national poverty line is around $11,770, and a fast food worker working full-time for an entire year would make around $18,850. Here are some ways that we can help fight poverty today outside the simulation, according to outreach-international.org. Active communities are an important factor because it's impossible to fight poverty if the people don't help. Not only do the former leaders need to be consulted, but also the affected themselves. Organized groups are also a key role. Work with as many people as you can to fight the hunger and come up with some sort of system in your city or town to help. Concerned citizens, as well as those affected by the problem, would be more than happy to participate and get the ball rolling for you. You also need to identify your area's main issues. This means consulting some of the people affected by poverty, or those living their lives out on the streets, to see how they ended up in their situation. It can be an educating as well as heartwarming experience. In the end, any projects you may start with your group need to relate back to the issues of the people. Lastly, you need to help the homeless and impoverished solve the issues that they are dealing with in terms of poverty. In other words, educating those who need it to help take steps to solve their own issues can be one of the most important factors. Many less fortunate people find themselves wondering what their next step should be. With their problems identified, help them find a solution. It can be as simple as finding them a job interview, or as difficult as doing their taxes. These are some great ways provided by Outreach-International that can help form the building blocks to solve these issues in your community. Now let's get started. With the support of those helping us get our game concept off the ground, and those who may be contributing to the poor or homeless in their country, we can end poverty as we know it today. There will always be homeless, and there will always be poor families. But even a single family's life changed, and the quality of life improved, makes a world of a difference. Please show us your support by helping us kickstart the game, donate to Stop Hunger Now or a charity of your choice, or raise awareness in your community. Thank you.